Hi, I'm Wendy Honig, the artistic director of the Judy Levis Krug Boca Raton Jewish Film Festival. I'm zooming in from Rhode Island, and I hope that you're all doing well and that you've been enjoying the virtual programming. Enormous gratitude to Leslie Rich, our festival program director. He makes it all happen. I want to thank the Adolph and Rose Levis JCC, Judy Levis Krug, Lisa Barish, our festival manager, Natalie Cohen, our festival coordinator, and the entire Sandler Center JCC staff who are working so hard to bring arts and culture programming to you, especially during these challenging times. A special thank you to BNY Mellon, who sponsored this film. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to have the festival. This is a webinar and you will not be able to see each other, but there's a chat feature where you can ask questions to Maya, Abi, and Rabbi Levin, and hopefully we'll have enough time to answer some of them. We want to welcome you to, I am so excited, the Florida premiere of Till Kingdom Come. I am delighted to have with us today Maya Zinshtein. She's the director of Till Kingdom Come. Maya is an Emmy award-winning Israeli documentary filmmaker and journalist. She was named Best Director at the 2016 Jerusalem Film Festival for her acclaimed documentary, Forever Pure, which later went on to win an Emmy Award. Rabbi Dan Levin, our moderator, serves as the senior rabbi of Temple Bethel and past president of Southeast Region of Central Conference of American Rabbis. Abi Troen is an award-winning Israeli documentary filmmaker and cinematographer. He has led documentary projects in Israel, Kenya, India, Mexico, and the US, and his work has screened at the American Pavilion at Cannes and online for the National Geographic, Vanity Fair, and Condé Nast. Till Kingdom Come follows the story of millions of American evangelicals who are praying for the state of Israel. Among them are the Binghams, a dynasty of Kentucky pastors and their evangelical congregants in an impoverished coal mining town. They donate sacrificially to Israel's foremost philanthropic organization, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, because they fervently believe the Jews are crucial to Jesus's return. Till Kingdom Come traces this unusual relationship and with unparalleled access exposes a stunning backstory of the Trump and Netanyahu administrations. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And first of all, I want to ask where you're zooming in from. Maya, where are you coming to us from?
Hello, everyone, and hello, Wendy. And thank you so much for such an amazing introduction. And it's really wonderful to be with your audience from Tel Aviv in Israel.
Wonderful. And Abi?
So much for having us. It's just noon here in Los Angeles.
And Rabbi Levin?
I'm in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida, somewhere in between Tel Aviv and Los Angeles. So it's good to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So there are rules, and the rules are that there are no rules. So if someone has asked a question and someone else would like to add to that answer, please jump right in. We're all family. And now I want to turn this over to Rabbi Dan Levin.
Well, thanks you to Wendy, and thank you to Maya and Abi for being with us. I was thrilled to be invited to share this time with you and to have a chance to explore more deeply this wonderful documentary, Till Kingdom Come, that you have produced, which explores this really, really complex relationship that Israel has with evangelical Christians in America, and to unpack their support for Israel and what that means, and the beautiful side of it and maybe the darker side of it. But my first question to both of you is, what inspired you to make this film? I know that I take our congregation's members to Israel very regularly, but I know from speaking to the guides that I am friends with in Israel and having spent many years there, there are a lot more Christian tourists in Israel than there are Jewish tourists in Israel. And that obviously goes by the numbers. There are, just south of 15 million Jews in the world, and there are hundreds of millions of evangelical Christians just in the United States, and around the world. So have you had experiences with the evangelical community in Israel? What was it about this topic that sort of made you say, hey, I want to invest part of my life to build a film around this?
Thank you, Rabbi Levin, and thank you for being here with us. I think we can have a really interesting conversation with you on this film. So actually, yes, today I know that there is a huge world of Christian evangelicals that traveling here in Israel. I have to say that it's almost a separate world of what the Israelis are experiencing. No, the idea for this film didn't come from me or AB meeting this community here, but actually I've been researching for my next project after I finished Forever Pure, my previous film, and I came across this involvement of the Christian evangelicals here. Actually, by chance, I've been asked to help on a different project where the Christian evangelicals were just a small angle in it. But that kind of drove me to start to look into this direction. It's important to say that here in Israel, the support of the Christian evangelicals, it's something that it's an issue that's very little known. Really, I think most of the Israelis would say, if you would tell them Christian evangelicals, they will tell you, oh, these Christians that love us, right? But really, the conversation never goes beyond that. So it was really interesting for me starting, and as Wendy mentioned, I'm also a journalist in my background. So, when I found myself for a month reading it till 5 a.m. Articles on this topic, so it was always a good sign when you find a subject that kind of drags you in. And it's important to say that it was a very specific moment in time. It was actually summer 2017. So the United States had a brand new president, Trump, and it was pretty clear from reading that he was heavily backed by this community. And it was also pretty clear that promises have been made during the campaign. And I remember that one of my first research conversations I had with the head of an organization that kind of connects the organizations that are having this bond between the Jews and the Christians. And I remember he told me, Maya, if you would be patient, so maybe towards the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, President Trump will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And as we probably all remember, all that happened 3 months after this conversation, and then the embassy moved. So I have to say, I remember that AB and myself filming and the moving in the event of the moving of the embassy, and I was saying to AB, but this is what's supposed to be our third act, and this happens at the beginning. So what will happen next? And of course, the reality is always much crazier that we can imagine. So it was really I just understood that there is a huge topic that is not explored, and I thought that it's going that this would be the right time to film it, because I felt that there are going to be events on the political level that would be interesting to follow.
Oh, for sure. And Avi, tell me what your interest in this project was.
I think there were a couple main things. One has to do with the content of the film, and the second with the way the film was going to be made. I myself I'm speaking to you from LA, but I'm also Israeli. And in this time, kind of the film hit many issues that were on the mind of at least many of my friends and colleagues, both here in the States and in Israel, which had to do with the Trump presidency and kind of how do Jews in Israel fit into that. And so, you know, tapping into this issue was all about, you know, church and state in America, but also about what does this mean? What does this reality look like for the future of Israel-US relations? And what does it mean to be an American Jew in this context with everything going on in the country? And so really, Maya and I spent 3 years like plunging one step at a time deeper and deeper into that question, ironically, by primarily spending a lot of time in church. And the other issue is about how the film was going to be made, and that is, you know, even speaking to you from LA, there was this notion of these evangelicals or people who, you know, believe things that are very different than what, you know, people in very blue states think. And I think one of the main, like our first or second shoot day was actually in Mar-a-Lago at the Trump estate. What was amazing was also as the one shooting the film as a cinematographer was not coming together with Maya as like a news, you know, event saying, look, this is what's happening on a big scale, but rather focusing intimately on our subject and trying to figure out who they are, what makes them tick. And we with the sincerity of the belief and the faith that all the people that we filmed had, and was finding those human moments, those inspiring moments, even within a very divisive, complicated political issue, that I thought, okay, this is a really important project, and together with Maya, let's go for it.
That's great. That's great. So having visited Israel many times, you know, you can see Israel through the windows of a bus and by looking at the archaeological sites, but, you know, you really only see Israel when you spend time with Israelis in their homes and away from Ben Yehuda Street. And in the same way, you know, you can see America through the windows of a bus and on Broadway and Hollywood Boulevard, but, you know, what was it like to be in a part of America that an average Israeli wouldn't visit, with the members of the Binghamton Baptist Church and in Middlesboro, Kentucky, a part of America that Israelis typically wouldn't visit or see, or for that matter, American Jews wouldn't naturally visit either. So what was it like to spend time in that place, in that town?
You know, I think that one of the things that I love the most in what I do, and I have to say I love almost everything in what I do, but it's actually that it gives me the opportunity to go to these places and to get to know new worlds that I had never had a chance to know them in a very intimate way, and it's really a blessing on the way that some of our characters would say in the film. So, you know, I think it was, you know, fascinating would be probably the obvious things to say, but I would say another thing. I think it was actually really important, especially for myself, being really a stranger to the situation. I just can give you a small example. I can hear that our characters has an accent, but and actually they have pretty heavy Southern accent, and I think almost every American would immediately put them in a certain box by hearing this accent. But for me, I can hear that maybe there is an accent, but I have zero context to this. So I was very much looking on them, you know, as a clear page, and I think that's the way they looked at me as well, because they couldn't put me in a box as well, because, you know, as you say, most of them never met an Israeli in their lives. So I think it was a good place to start, to have these relationships, because, you know, filming someone for so long, it is a relationship that you're having with these people, and it was fascinating and it was amazing. And I have to say that we met there really wonderful people that, you know, opened their homes for us, and you know, and it was so in that sense it was really interesting. But also it was, you know, it was really, I think, the moment when we arrived to Middlesboro and we saw this huge Israeli flag in front of this church in a place where there's zero Jews and of course zero Israelis as well. and then seeing the Star of David on the cross. This is something that for Israeli, this is a very strange feeling. Like you almost don't know how to feel, because you understand that this is something that really, I think you cannot, you try to understand it, you know, but you really, there's no really explanation sometimes for that. So it was always, you know, but it also was to be in a place that's very much different of you. And of course, there's also challenging moments on that.
I'm sure.
Rabbi has things to add on that.
Yeah, Avi, I was going to ask you, you know, how was it that you were able, I was really struck with the intimacy and the openness of the congregation there and its members with you, and certainly your subjects of how honest and open they were. And how did you build that trust with that community? How did you get them to open up to you? Do you think it mattered that you were Israeli and not American that helped with that? Maybe go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, relationships with documentary subjects goes both ways. So just as we were curious about them, they were curious about us. And that, you know, as Maya mentioned, people who had a giant Star of David in their church and Israeli flags waving, but were in the heart of Appalachia and had, you know, ideas of what an Israeli would be like, but many had never met, you know, a Jew, let alone an Israeli in their lives. So to have the two of us arrive with cameras into their community, it really was an opportunity for them to ask questions. I'll give you this anecdote, and specifically as now we're taking care of all this promotional stuff for the film. I went through some of the raw footage, and there's a scene where a boy speaks to the community and says, you know, the Jews, they're better than us, and he talks about you know, indoctrination. Well, if you scroll to the rest of that footage, he's actually, you know, telling the community also, here, you've studied about these people. How many of you have ever met an Israeli? And not a single hand goes up. And they say, who wants to ask questions? And, you know, in the film, it jumps to, you know, when are we done? But in reality, people were like very curious to know who we were and what it meant to be from the Holy Land. And so that was a conversation starter. I think everything that followed since then, like questions of legacy, right? Boyd is the second or third pastor actually in a dynasty of pastors. What do we inherit from our parents? You know, speaking to you as a rabbi and to a Jewish community, the questions of Ve'egalit bincha are ingrained in us. So we could share that, and that's a universal theme that we could sort of discuss when the camera was down or while we were eating cornbread and talking about, you know, why we believe what we believe, where we come from, and what we hope to do with the work that we're doing in the world.
That's fascinating. Maya, you've said that you were trying to make a film about love, but you posed also an interesting question, which is, how do you love a people in a place that you don't know, that you've never visited? So I find it amazing. It must have been sort of extraordinary to arrive in this town. There's a Israeli flag outside the church. There's a huge Magen David literally hanging on the cross. And I love that the footage you had of them actually hanging the Magen David on the cross. And I was thinking, God, there's just so much to unpack with that image that I'm not going to go there. But what was it like to visit people who professed a tremendous amount of love for you, for us as a people, for the state of Israel, but who had never really met Jews and who had never met Israelis and had never really been there?
Yeah, you're right. You know, the beginning of making this film, it was about love, just because every person that I talked with him or I read about this, it was constantly like, when I was saying, so explain to me these relationships, and they would say, oh, we love you. And I felt that, you know, you go to this and then you have this wall of we love you, but no one actually explains to you, but what it actually means. You know, when I've loved someone, is someone that I know, and it's someone that I met, and it's someone that we developed a certain relationship, and then, you know, love comes later. Love doesn't come, and we share something, right? And when this term has been used so regularly on this relationship, it was really interesting for me to actually, and then I started to ask questions and say, but what it actually means that you love me if you don't know me? And actually I think I received the best answer. It didn't happen in Kentucky. It happened in one of the events that Abby and I attended, a Christian events. And there was a young guy that was honest enough to tell me, listen, you need to understand because I asked him that, and he told me, when they say to you that they love you, they mean that they love Jesus. You like, he told me, you are the key. You need to understand that we cannot make it without you. So every time that you hear that they love you, actually what they mean, that they love Jesus. And I think that was a first step for me for start understanding that in a way, and again, I'm putting aside a personal relationship that Abby and I had within the community of Middlesbrough, Kentucky, which again, I would say today, with all the complexity, I love these people because they were, they were really open and honest with us, and I respect that. But on a more general level, I think we need to understand, when there's so many people in the world that just saying we love you, it's not an unconditional love. and this love has conditions, and we need to play a certain role in the prophecy. And that's the reason why they love us. And when, here, and we need to understand that there's also a price for this love. This love comes with certain obligations that we need to have as a Jewish people, because again, we are part of prophecy. And I think that's something that many, we are as Jews, we're so used to be hated. So once someone comes to us and says, we love you, we just taken it, we're not asking, is this love is good for us? Is it, is it bad for the Jews? Is it good for the Jews? An old question. And I think it's complicated for the Jews. That's my answer to that. And I think that's why it was so important to look into this love and actually to explore it.
So Abby, were there times when you were with this community where you, because you were like symbolically present in this place and physically present, so there's in some ways, you are Israel to them, you are Jewish to them, and so I'm sure that there must have been some pressure to do some sense of hasbara, but was there ever a time when the archetype they had in their head of what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be an Israeli, that you like had to sort of either disabuse them of that because of who you are individually as a person, or did you sort of keep a detachment because you're a documentary filmmaker and you don't want to be the story, they're the story? I'm just sort of curious to know, like, how you balanced, being that Jew in that community and what it meant when maybe you didn't meet their anticipated standard, for example.
Wow, that is such a great question.
Great question.
And some of the best questions we've been asked at any Q&A.
It's always good to have a rabbi in a conversation.
It's always good to have a rabbi, yes. I think we all, when we tell our stories, let alone when you're making a documentary and there are things that you include and things that you omit, you are selective. So, what we shared, I think, of ourselves were certain things. I also think, I'm sorry to go on with that, in every relationship, I think also, even though there was intimacy that evolved, you sort of, you show your best side, just like you would, on a first date, second date, until it's maybe a few years of marriage, then sort of the other stuff comes out. But here, I think, we love Israel very, very deeply, and they love Israel very, very deeply. So we could agree on that. Believe it or not, we had very lengthy conversations about Game of Thrones. And, you know, like, you know, I will say that actually within the things that we love about Israel, we were able actually to be concrete with them in ways I think that they didn't anticipate. That I think is true. So for instance, you know, I served in the military. I was a combat paramedic. Maya was an officer in the army as well. And like, you know, my experiences even serving in the Israeli army are more like complicated than something you would imagine if you'd watch a Hollywood representation of what it means to be in the military. So I could go into detail with them on that and sort of take something from a poster to sort of an actual experience. You know, one of the kids who went to school there had a poster of Yoni Netanyahu on his wall. You know, and the Entebbe battle was this big epic, right? So I could share with him my experiences from serving in the military, and I was able also to say things that for me were complicated, you know, on more than one reason, politically or emotionally, like navigating, and they were respectful and able to accept that. The other anecdote I can tell you about being an Israeli is that in a previous job, I had to do a behind the scenes with Gal Gadot. And
That's a terrible job.
It's a terrible job. Pays almost as much as documentary filmmaking. And, you know, and at the end there was a hug. And so the moment they knew that I had hugged Gal Gadot, there was like a line of the young men of Middlesbrough, Kentucky that hugged me so that vicariously, you know, they'd be hugging one who
they could hug Wonder Woman.
So yeah, so being Israeli includes a whole bunch of things imagined and real, and I think we were selective, but I don't think there was an element of we weren't lying. We were just being very forthright about certain things that we could share. Just like we didn't ask them, let's talk deeply about Jesus right now. So Maya can take it from there.
Yeah, I want to add on that, Rabbi, because I did think that, and actually that's what the film tried to say as well. And we all share, you know, we're all human beings. We all share so many things. And I think sometimes we forget that, especially because we became so divided. But it's actually very easy to find a common language with people. You know, maybe because I'm an immigrant. I came to Israel when I was 10 from Russia. So for the rest of my life, I will be Oleh Hadash. In my soul almost. Or maybe I will be the other in my soul, because in Russia I was Maya Zinshtein. You know, you cannot be mistaken on who I am. And then I came to here and I became the Russian girl. So I guess this is my destiny to be the other. But I think that's actually also, you know, that I feel comfortable to go to places that I don't know and meet people that come from totally different backgrounds, because I feel you will always find something to share with them. And I can tell you, just as an example, you know, as this feeling of me of being the other, this is something, and you know, and not being from the elite and not being, you know, accepted so many times. This is something that people in Middlesbrough actually share with me on an emotional level, because they also, many of them would feel that they are the other, right? That they are the forgotten people, that they are not part of the elite. And then suddenly there's something so deep in your soul that you share, because this is part of your identity of who you are, and you sharing it from someone in Kentucky. And that's, you know, when you think on that, we're all human beings. We all have the same set of emotions. And I think once you're looking on any journey that you take as a documentary filmmaker and also as a human being, on that way, that actually opens for you the whole world, and it doesn't and it doesn't stop you, because basically, you know, you can talk with everyone.
So Maya, I'm struck by that, that idea of othering and trying to introduce somebody in a way. I was struck by how you chose to introduce Boyd to us at the beginning of the film, with his very significant assault weapon and going out into the woods and doing target practice. And at the same time, you're introducing us to the fullness of his humanity and the burden that he accepts with his role that he's going to play in his father and grandfather's church and in the community where he was born and raised, and now is going to become a spiritual leader. There is this interesting juxtaposition of him in his sort of civvies, right, out in the woods practicing with his gun, and then him in his ministerial suit with his, hair combed and all that. Tell me why you chose to open the movie with this set of scenes and what you were trying to convey.
Well, I think the opening scene is, of course, it's a very powerful scene that sets, it gives you so many hints about what is about to come. But I have to say that alongside with the weapon, he's also quoting Shakespeare. And this is actually the first line that the film opens with an evangelical pastor quoting Shakespeare. And of course, it's not by chance that happened, I think that was the moment for me to say, yes, he's maybe now I know that you're putting him now in a box, but actually he's not, doesn't exactly fit to your box. And I will play with this box with you. And that's basically, what that was my hope. AB and I had, we've been doing test screenings through the editing process. And it was so interesting to see, and we were editing in New York. So most of the people, of course, were from the progressive side, let's say that way. And it was so interesting because at some point we started to receive responses. I can't believe that they like an evangelical pastor so much. And this was exactly what we were trying to do, because that's the thing. People are not black and white. We want to think that they are, but they are not. And it was really easy, to make them as just the placards, like just, black or white. But this is not the reality. So for me, the opening scene, of course, it's a very memorable scene. So you need to open you need to take your audience. Yeah.
Have me at hello. Yeah.
When you look at this, but I do think when you look at this scene carefully, you understand that there is, like, it really sets so many small things of how I'm going to work with this character, and there's a payoff for this scene down the road, and yeah, it was like, it's not, there's a film that's called Borat, right? And there's someone else that doing that. It's not me. I'm doing something else. And it's probably good to have both. But I want my audience to be confused and say, but how I can like him. But this is the thing. These people are not monsters. They're not, they actually can be really nice people, but on the same time, sometimes have very troubling views. And that's the interesting part in us as human beings.
Yeah, the tensions that you described there, I really felt them actually all bundled up with one character, which was Yael Eckstein. And her father, Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein of blessed memory, who I understand passed away during the production of the film, which I'm sure was its own drama and challenge. I think about her, and she's clearly a deeply committed Jew. She's an observant Jew. She's a committed Zionist. And then at the same time, you sort of depict the challenges that she has with the people that I think she loves too. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of what you learned about her and from her in your relationship with her, how does she wrestle with those conflicts? You know, there's the scene where she's sitting in church and the pastor kind of says, yeah, we're kind of praying for your destruction, and that's a little uncomfortable. And how does she deal with that dissonance of what that means? We'll explore. I have a second question to that, but I'll just sort of start there. What was she like? And obviously the work that the International Fellowship does in some ways is incredibly remarkable. And the scene that you had with the older woman that they were providing food for, and, you know, it was incredibly moving. But at the same time, you know, you have to be careful sometimes with who you make as your bedfellows, and what does that mean? So I'm just curious to know a little bit about, she's such a complex person, but she presents as kind of not so complex, but you could feel it. That's why I thought the brilliance of the film was in able to expose these complexities in these different characters. Maybe talk about her for a few moments.
Yeah, I will start, and maybe please feel free to join me whenever you feel. First of all, I will be very cautious to speak on Yael's behalf. You know, I'm again, yes, we spent some time and we had a very long talks, me and her, over these years, but still, you know, I'm looking on her from outside. I have to say, and I think, as I felt that the key for the answer that, or your question, actually lies on what you said at the beginning. You know, she's the second generation. Rabbi Eckstein was the one that, you know, established it, and she has this legacy to carry on, and this is a heavy burden. And you know, it's interesting because, as I said, I'm an immigrant, so my roots has been cut, right, and I needed to start over from scratch and created a legacy for my family, you know, in the future. But Yael had her father, and that established this organization that, again, I would agree with you. Yes, the Fellowship of Christians and Jews doing very important things here in Israel, helping for people, for many people that are in need. That goes without saying. But and for me, it was, I think, this idea of legacy, and as you can see, also Boyd is actually a third generation. So these two young people carrying this legacy on their shoulders. And it's a very different experience of what I had, right? So, and to be honest, I was always very jealous on people that had a legacy to carry on. And I felt that why I needed to start from scratch. But and it was interesting for me to speak with her on that topic. And I think once Rabbi Eckstein Zal died, I think that was something that it was totally unexpected. But I think also it put her in a very complicated situation. She cannot lose on this battle. She just can't. She doesn't. She has no choice. You know, it's very interesting when your family kind of puts you on this trial, and you walk, and sometimes it's really difficult to take, you know, to go in a different direction. So for your questions about how she's dealing with this complexity, I would say I think she's not dealing with that, and that's the only way to deal with that.
She sort of takes it and puts it aside. Avi, what did you see in that, you know, and how, you know, what it felt like for you in some respects, of course, in making the film as a Jew, to see this sort of complexity play out in her?
Well, I think I'll answer it this way. I've been to many interfaith events in my life. Most have been, as Maya said, more of the progressive persuasion, which is to say, you know, you'd have an imam, a rabbi, a Catholic priest, and, you know, an evangelical, and sometimes not an evangelical, sorry, usually not, but a Protestant, and sort of everyone would talk about the need for diversity and sort of embracing the other. Rarely, or almost never in those events do people talk about the differences. You know, they don't sit around and say, well, let's talk about hell now. Or, you know, well, actually, if you open the Quran, you find this. Or a rabbi won't say, well, we are the chosen people. You all can believe whatever you want. Like, it doesn't work that way. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is, I think in faith, Yael says something that there is paradox sometimes inherent in faith and how we, you know, navigate what we believe and really believe with other people's beliefs and kind of navigating the real world. And so I think the case of the evangelicals and Jews, because it opens this kind of odd vortex, you could say, of like, we share the same values, but do we? It's like an extreme case of things that you can find elsewhere. Because Yael, you know, I think her personal struggle is because in all these other interfaith examples I've given, people don't go on stage and say, we are almost one. And yet this is what she does. When she stands in the church, she says, the destiny of the Jewish people is the destiny of this church, and the destiny of this church is the destiny of the Jewish people. So to make that kind of claim, you know, you need to have a lot of inner power to also comprehend the parts where perhaps the destiny of this church is not the destiny of the Jewish people. And that is a fine line that she has to navigate herself. And finally, just to say, as Maya said, I think as a human, really, she's, you know, we were privileged to be so close to her and see kind of all the amazing work that she does and kind of her process. And we have a lot of respect and appreciation for being able to do that.
So in the film, just to explore that a little more deeply, there's an interview that you have with Reverend Johnny Moore, who is one of the evangelical advisors to the president, and he said that part of their mission is to translate geopolitical realities through the lens of prophecy. So on the one hand, you could look at Christian support for Israel. It makes such a difference, you know, with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and over $100 million a year in philanthropic support that does wonderful things for vulnerable people. And you see it in the US Congress and the military and foreign aid, the billions of dollars that America gives to Israel and to maintain their qualitative military advantage and all of the other things that America does to support the very special relationship that we share with Israel, support of the United Nations and all of that. And then on the other hand, if you play out that relationship from an evangelical standpoint, that ends with the destruction of the Jewish people, Armageddon, and the rapture. So, you know, I guess it sort of asks us as Israelis, as Jews, to sort of say to ourselves, you know, what's the cost of this bargain that we're making? Because on the one hand, you say, hey, you know, we've got these incredible partners that are supportive of us and love us exactly, Maya, as you said, who are going to stand with us as we say Israel, like every other nation, should get to determine where its capital is and all of the things that go with that. And at the same time, you're partnering with people like John Hagee, who have extraordinary histories of intolerance, homophobia, and even anti-Semitic beliefs. So I found that to be an incredible tension that you brought out in the film, and curious to know sort of what that brought up in you as the filmmakers in exploring this odd bargain that American evangelicals and Israelis are making at this stage in our relationship.
I think it's a great question. Actually, that question kind of brought me to make this film. I have to say that I'm very little concerned about the end and about the Armageddon. That's not the reason, you know, like, not because I'm worried about what will happen to us during the Armageddon. That wasn't the reason for me to making this film. I'm actually very much worried about our actual present, and let's say the nearest future. And I think this bargain that we're making, we don't understand the price, and the price won't come at the Armageddon stage. I think we're paying it today, because when United States, when the president of the United States, that backed by this community, is pushed to make decisions that really changing the reality on the ground of what happens here, and where the advisors that pushing him to do that are actually, basing their views on the Bible and not on the reality on the ground. That actually concerns me, and I think the film gives these 3 examples that we are tracking that happened over these the years of Trump administration, moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, cutting the aid to the Palestinians, and the deal of the century. And I would choose actually one example that I think really shows in the most clear way how disconnected this support from the reality, and maybe it's a good moment to think about this word support. Support is actually a subjective term. What they would perceive as a support for Israel, maybe I won't see as a support, right? Who said that pushing Israel to stay, in Judea and Samaria, with the West Bank, that's actually a support. That actually makes the situation here on the ground very much complicated. But if we're going back to this question of cutting the aid to the Palestinians, the American aid to the Palestinians. So, Abby and I, in this event of Christians United for Israel, led by John Hagee that you mentioned, and we see this enormous event of lobby event when 5,000 evangelicals sent to the Capitol Hill to push for that America would cut the aid to the Palestinians, and a month later, that's what actually happens. I don't know if many people know, but all the security community of Israel were totally against that. Really, because the security community in Israel understands very well what it means for us to have a humanitarian crisis on our borders, right? So when you see something that can be that is so dangerous, really dangerous, but also dangerous in the sense of when the security community, right, people that really responsible for this place say, no, we don't want that. And then you see this community going and pushing for that. And then it happens, you asking yourself, is it really support? Or they actually, again, pushing their worldview that maybe that has nothing to do with our safetyness here on the ground. And that's something that is really, this, I think they made an amazing process of creating this, that they almost own this word support of Israel, right? Today, the Jewish community of the United States would be considered as a not supportive of Israel. Trump said it time after time after time. The Jews are not supporting the state of Israel, it's the evangelicals are. So, but they took this word support and they own it, but they actually support a very specific political views, very right-wing political views that many of Israelis won't consider as support whatsoever.
Yeah, it was interesting, of course, when you think about who's a supporter of Israel, someone like John Hagee, and then you take a look, Tel Aviv is one of the most gay-friendly cities in the world, and you sort of square those kinds of things. I was really touched by the scene in the film when they were engaging with the Palestinian Christian pastor. And here you have this amazing wrestle match with, do we as Christians connect with the other Christians over here? Or do we connect with those who have the same right-wing politics as we have, and how they wrestled with that? Avi, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be with the Palestinians, engaging with these other Christians with Christians, but then seeing themselves on two different sides of that kind of question that Maya was referencing there?
Well, it was an amazing scene to film. You know, I think you know, the easy answer is to say that you know, Pastor Boyd was unable to see the Palestinian plight or the person in front of him and what he was going through, because he was fixed in a certain worldview that he had come from, and that politics trumped theology and faith in that sense. I do think there are two specific nuances or anecdotes following the film that I think are relevant and we can learn from that moment. One is that I'm talking about that scene, and Boyd, having heard like several Q&As where that scene was referenced, said, you know, that he had heard other people say how he hadn't seen the plight of the Palestinians in that moment. And he said, well, I'm from Kentucky. You know, this is my world. This is what I know. Most of the people in my community have, you know, not met a Jew or an Israeli in that situation. And all I know is what I've learned and what the worldview that I come from. And to expect him to switch 180 degrees by meeting a Palestinian might have been putting too much weight on his shoulders, if that makes sense. So the lesson there within is, I suppose, that we all have preconceived notions, and they don't change easily. The second thing he mentioned was also that the Palestinian pastor also believes in what is called replacement theology, which is to say that the Jews no longer play a role in God's eyes. And I think that, you know, that actually is also not only political, that is also a theological difference, because Boyd sees the Jews as our best friends, whereas other Christian faith sees Jews as completely irrelevant. So that's also important to mention in that sense. When we say who are our friends, that's also part of the equation.
It's interesting, you know, because I think that part of what I found, there was the scene where you were interviewing him on the bus after he left that encounter, and it basically says, I just can't deal with that. You know, you presented me with the truth and I'm not processing. And I think that part of the brilliance of the film is that you bring us and we have to process what you're showing us. You put truths in front of us. And I guess that's what documentary film is about, putting truths in front of people and say, okay, have fun with this, wrestle with this, engage with these truths, even if they're uncomfortable, even if they make you question your previously held beliefs. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's left on the cutting room floor. Pieces that you didn't include in the film. One in particular that I think we're all sort of curious about is the scene that you mentioned that was at Mar-a-Lago that you didn't include in the film, a fundraiser for the International Fellowship and what you saw there. So can you tell us a little bit about what you experienced at Mar-a-Lago? And of course, obviously the juxtaposition of the opulence of Mar-a-Lago with the modest means of the folks from Middlesbrough.
Maya?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Abe, you want to start on that question?
What has been omitted and left on the editing room floor that is worth mentioning? Like
about Mar-a-Lago.
Specifically in Mar-a-Lago, what happened there that was
Maybe
amazing?
Talk a little bit about Mar-a-Lago and if there's other pieces too.
Well, I think the most exceptional thing about Mar-a-Lago, except for this like sense of victory that I think we both had, being like, yes, we got to film in Mar-a-Lago.
I've done weddings there, it's nice.
Oh, okay, there we go. I have not yet attended one. This was certainly not a wedding. You know, I think the most amazing thing was hearing these testimonies that the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews does, like has recorded and promotes its work, where on these massive screens in the major hall, you heard evangelical after evangelicals giving statements like, I used to own a small business and was close to filing bankruptcy. And then I gave money to the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and was helping support Israel. And God saw what I had done and started blessing me, and today I own a franchise. Or, you know, all these testimonies of how giving money to Jews was helping them. This is a literal interpretation of Genesis 12:3, where God says to Abraham, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse them. And they really interpret that, you know, if I give money, God will repay me as well. I mean, obviously, many evangelicals believe many, many different things. So it's not that everyone believes this, but that was what the fellowship was promoting. And so there you were at Mar-a-Lago with Trump, you know, emblems everywhere. And I don't know how many people, if it was over 1,000, but many, many wealthy individuals there, and everyone's clapping to this. And that was an odd moment, you know, as a Jewish person, as an American citizen, as an Israeli citizen, and as just someone observing, where you wonder, you know, what are the roles of each of the parties involved here, politically, financially, and religiously. Is this kind of, anyway, it raised a lot of questions for us that did not make it into the editing room, but I hope the film as a whole still poses.
Sure. I have one last question. I know we could do this for hours, but Maya, I know it's late there, and I appreciate you staying up with us late in Tel Aviv. They say it's a city that never sleeps, but you're entitled to sleep there if you want to. Talk to us about the last scene of the film. And if you haven't seen the film, here's a spoiler alert. There's a very, very powerful scene with an interview with William Bingham, who is the pastor. And it's this moment that almost, it's like you can't believe you're in a dream. It's this very powerful image where he has this comment, "You stupid Jewish people." But of course, he knew he was being filmed because there's a camera in his face, right? And I'm just wondering, like, you know, how did it feel, obviously, to be in the room when he said that? And what was the sort of purpose in leaving us with that, as opposed to putting it in the middle of the film and chewing on it, but leaving us with that image? Maya, tell us a little bit about sort of what we're to take from that and your own experience of it, because for me, just as a viewer, it was kind of a jaw-dropping, oh my goodness, and I can only imagine what it was kind of like to be in the room with him at that moment.
Well, you know, my voice is not heard in the film, besides a few questions that I'm asking. And I would say that through evangelical pastor, I'm saying exactly what I want, what I would love to say to my audience. You blind, stupid Jewish people, can't you see what's happening? So that maybe on an artistic level, you know. Yeah, he's being honest there and I have to say, I always appreciate when my characters are honest with me. I think he says, yeah, with a smile, and you know, maybe it was a half joke. Probably it was a half joke on the way that he said it. But the thing is that you know, we ignore constantly of the dark side of this bomb, and I think this dark side should not be ignored. It should be at least discussed and seen and faced, and then you can make a decision what you think on that. So on the level why it's at the end, yeah, I think this is my personal message said by an evangelical pastor, and I encourage everyone to go and watch the film and see what he says. But also, you know, I think it definitely was the ending point. You know, when you're taking your audience to a certain journey, and you're going with him on this journey, and there's good moments that you feel good, there's the ones you feel bad, but there's, I don't know, I think a certain feeling that you as a director want your audience will, go out of the cinema, well, in a good days, and will bring him to think. And that was my main goal of this film, to make people think. And
Well,
Amy and
I have to tell you, Maya, I really think that you achieved your goal, because I think the film really does make you think. I think, one of the things about Israel and really about the world is we all want it to be in very neat boxes. We want it to be simple. We want there to be good guys and bad guys. And we want it to fit in this nice little box that you can describe in a minute, 40 seconds, and then we can move to commercial. And of course, Israel and the issue that you tackle in this film is really complicated and really complex. And you approach it in such an honest and open way. I think for all of the viewers, if you saw the movie, you know that you kind of want to go back and see it again, because there was so much to unpack in those experiences. If you haven't seen the movie, make sure that you see it at least once. It's an important film because it makes you just sort of think about all of the different trades that we're all willing to make for the things that we care about. And where do we, ad kan, how far are we willing to go where we say, yeah, maybe that partnership isn't worth it if in order to be in that partnership, I have to accept or be in partnership with someone who may contradict the values that I hold most dear. And I saw that conflict play out so magnificently in your film, and I think you've done a really, really important work. So I appreciate you both being with us today. And Wendy, it was truly an honor to get to be here, and so proud of Judy Levis-Krug and the wonderful film series that we have this month. There's so many wonderful films to enjoy. So Wendy, I give it back to you.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. But before we conclude, I'd like to know from Maya and Aby, what projects are you working on now? And if you have a closing comment statement, now's the time.
No, so I think it's for my next project. It's still too early to say, but I think it's, I have a dream to make something easy about butterflies, but it probably won't happen. And I most likely will find myself dealing again with something very timely and I hope fascinating. I wish myself to be able to keep exploring new worlds. And that's my wish for myself. And I want to say thank you, Rabbi Levin. This was an amazing conversation. Really, Aby and I already had quite a few of these, but this was definitely one of the best ones because, I think you were able to see so many things, and in these 76 minutes that we worked on them for 3 years. This is, you put a lot of thought in every second, and I really felt that you saw it. So thank you. Saw it in a deep meaning of this word, not just saw it. So thank you for that. And Wendy, thank for you again for arranging that. And I hope to be back next time in person.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Maya. After Forever Pure and now this, forget it. You're part of our festival always. Aby, tell me your closing comment, or tell us what you're working on now.
So, Maya and I have a little something cooking in the kitchen as one project, and then there's another project which I can't say too much about yet, but I will say that I've been spending some time up in Silicon Valley, and after spending 3 years feeling like, religion ran the world, it's refreshing and daunting to understand that there are actually quite a few other forces at play. And I will say that also, like Maya, I really want to spend some time surrounded by butterflies.
I think I do too. Yeah. I like that thought. I want to thank you so much for being part of this webinar. Your participation in discussing this very interesting subject with our community is so very appreciated. Rabbi Levin, thank you so much for moderating this important webinar. Amaya and Abby want to wish you continued luck with this film. As I said before, Maya, after Forever Pure and Till Kingdom Come, we can expect so many more outstanding films from you, and we definitely want to screen them in our festival. I am totally quite your fan. So I hope you all enjoyed the webinar and that you're enjoying all of the films and webinars in the festival. I want you to stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.